Hello everyone, today I'm going to be showing you how to use Turbo to do independent streams depending on what your permissions are. So for example, on the right here, I have an admin. I can type test. The admin has the ability to delete the message both as an admin and as the creator of the message. You'll see over here I have a regular user. They can't do anything to this message, but if they create a message themselves, they are given the ability to delete it with the message creator delete button. You can see over here in the admin window, they only have the ability to admin delete this because they didn't have the message creator button rendered for them. This is really useful if you have a chat room and you want your admins to have the ability to quickly delete messages, but you don't want everyone to see it, and you don't want to have to do some client-side JavaScript to hide that deletion button. It's also really useful if you want, users to be able to do their own independent edits. So we're going to cover that. Hopefully things work smoothly. I don't know. I have like 30 minutes to go before this video has to go up. So we are going to try and do this as quickly as possible. We're going to go ahead and start by seeding out of here and making a new Rails project. I will just call mine video. This is just a blank, empty Rails project. I'll go ahead and I'll move both of these to a empty tab, which just go to localhost port 3000. And then I'll go ahead and I'll resize some of this stuff because we're only going to need some of these windows. And then I'll hopefully be able to, I don't know why it's not letting me resize just one of these, but of course. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's CD into our video, and then let's try to do a code dot, and hopefully it'll be fine without forcing me to resize both of those windows. Of course, so we're going to try and do this manually. I really, really love Windows sometimes. It's absolutely fascinating how this still manages to work. But okay, so we have this. Let's see if I can remember all the stuff I did. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a bundle add for devise because we need to have devise added into our application. That'll go ahead, add it to our gem file and run the bundle install. We can then do a rails g devise :install command to install devise, of course. We can then do a rails g devise user to create our user model. And then the last thing we want to do is a rails g migration add admin to users. And then we'll say admin : Boolean. That'll give us the ability to have our admin user accounts. Once that's done, we can go ahead and do a Rails G scaffold for our rooms, and we're only going to give each room a name. That's pretty much it. We'll go ahead, we'll hit enter on that. The last thing we have to do is a Rails G model for our messages. Each message will have a body of type text. It'll have a user : belongs to and a room : belongs _to. We can go ahead and we can hit enter on that. Now we can go ahead and do a Rails DB : migrate command to migrate our database. We can then go ahead and exit out of here, come over to our VS Code, hit Control+ a bunch so we can actually see what I'm typing. And now we're going to have to go into our seeds file. We're going to come over to our DB and our seeds.rb, open this up. I'll hit F11 so you can read this. I'm going to paste in some code because most people don't care about this part. We're just creating two users here. I'm going to go ahead and change this one to an admin by typing admin true. First one's dean@example.com. That is our admin account. Then we have john@do.com. That does not have admin set to true, so they will just be a regular user. Last thing we do is we seed this with an example room. Go ahead and hit Control S to save this, F11 to exit out of the full screen. Then we'll do a Rails DB : hit F11, seed. That will add that information into our database. We can now go ahead and type Rails S to start the server. I lied. You can do a Rails G controller, and I think I called it messages because we do need a messages controller. Now we can do our Rails S, and I can finish clearing my throat. All right, so now that that's done, and I'm done having a coughing fit, we can come into our config and our routes.rb real quick. And in here, all we want to do, I'll hit Control B to hide the side panel, Control Enter to move down. We want to set the root of the application to be the rooms controller index action. And we want to do the resources for the rooms to wrap the resources for the messages. That'll let us do like room _messages _path whenever we need to get that specific route. Next, we can come into all of our models. The first one's going to be our user model. Our user is going to has many messages, and it will be a dependent : destroy, something like that. we can actually grab this and come into our room.rb. Inside of our room.rb, this will also has many messages and dependent destroy for that as well. Hit Control S to save that. Next, let's come into our message.rb. It belongs to a user, belongs to a room. That looks good. Let's come into our messages controller now. And hopefully at this point, you've watched enough of these tutorials to know sort of how this works, because it's the same workflow every time we do one of these. But we can say before action, we'll do an authenticate underscore user. And actually, you kind of want to have everything authenticated throughout this whole app with how I'm going to be building this. But let's say you have a different workflow. Just make sure you're checking to make sure the users exist when you try to do stuff. We can go ahead and do our def create. Now, this def create is going to have some different logic than what GitHub Copilot thinks it needs. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to start by grabbing the @room from our room.find params with the room ID. We'll pass that in later. We then want to do an @message is equal to @room.messages.build, where we do the message params. We have to define the message params, of course. So we'll come down here, create a private area, give it a def message params, params.require message, permit body. This is pretty standard Rails stuff. It's just what usually gets created with like a boilerplate controller when you do like a scaffold. We can then do a @message.user is equal to current user. That's pretty self-explanatory. We're just saying that this message has a user, which is equal to whoever is signed in right now. And then we just do a @message.save. Now, in most cases, what you would do here is you would do a redirect back to the room that you created this message in, but we want to be streaming this stuff, so we're going to skip this step and we'll just manually refresh. We can then come down here and we can do a destroy action. This one's pretty self-explanatory as well. We just find the message by the ID and then we call @message.destroy. This is pretty much it for our messages controller, to the point where I'm actually going to go ahead and close this, and on blind faith, I'm just going to assume that it works, and we'll probably be back here in a couple of minutes when it doesn't. Okay, now that we have that, we can get to the fun part. And by fun part, I mean the part that makes my head hurt if I think about it too much. Basically, we come into our index. In here, we have all of our rooms. Let's go ahead. Let's check the rooms real quick. I'm going to just move this over, and I'm going to actually undo everything that I did to get to this point, because I think this is a cleaner way of doing it. So we have our rooms here. We have our example room. We click show room. This is an empty room. There's nothing else going on here. I think we should just add in the stuff to like see the messages. So how did I do that in the demo application? Well, we come into our room, we hit Control B to hide the side panel. And essentially what I did was I replaced this first part right here with the room.name with just an h1 and a room.name inside of the h1. I then did a render for the message form. This is going to be inside of messages/form, and I pass in the room. So let's go take a look at what the messages form looks like. That's going to be in our views messages, and that's empty. So we have to right click new file underscore form.html.erb. And that'll allow us to open this. Now, I do apologize for awkward pauses. I am copying and pasting code in this video to try and speed things up. We can then go ahead and do a form width for the model. We just create a message.new, and we pass in a URL of room underscore messages underscore path, and then we pass in the room. We then say local true. This part I don't think matters, so we'll just get rid of it. We then do a do with an F, and then f.text field for the body, and an f.submit. So why are we doing a message.new and passing in the URL here? Well, if we do something like I think the way I normally do this is we have something like room and then room.messages.build to create like an empty message. What happens is when we go to iterate through stuff, it kind of breaks with our loop where we show all the messages because I'm putting this form at the top. So instead, I just save myself the headache and I do it like this, and I just clean up the code a little bit on the controller side like you just saw. So for this one, we're just going to leave it with a message.new, and we'll pretend we know what we're doing. I'm going to go ahead and close this form here because we really don't need it. Okay, so now we have this. Let me hit Control S and F11 and come over here and refresh. So now we can see this neat little form, but of course, if I try to create anything here, it'll tell me I need to be signed in to do stuff. So let's go ahead and let's sign in real quick. Go to /users/sign in, and we can sign in with one of the two accounts we made earlier in our seed file. In my case, it's going to be dean@example.com, and I'm now signed in. We'll go ahead and create a message here by typing in test. And then if I hit create, we should see in here that it was created, but it's not displayed on the screen. So we have to refresh. And now the message is in the back end, and we just have to like actually get the message to show here. And the way that we get the message to show here is we're going to have a H2 that says messages. We'll hit Control S to save that, refresh. There you go. You see the messages. Now let's actually make it do something. Let's start by creating a div with an ID of messages. This part is important. We are going to be referencing this div with an ID of messages specifically. So if you change what this word is right here, you're going to have to change it when we try to call it later. So just be aware of that. We now grab the room and we say room.messages.eachDo, and we iterate through each of the messages. Now for each of these messages, we're going to be doing a lot of fancy stuff and we'll hopefully build up to it. So I'm going to try and break it apart to the best of my abilities. Basically, we grab the render for the messages/message, just like that. And then we're just going to pass in the message for now, and then we'll save it like that. We can now come into our message partial. So we got to come over here. We got to go to our messages folder, right click new file, and then we have to say _message.html.erb. And now inside of our message partial, we have to do some fancy turbo stuff. The first thing we have to do is we have to say this is a turbo frame tag for the DOM ID of message do. And if you're familiar with this, all the DOM ID is it's just going to grab the name of the model, which is just going to be the word message, add an underscore, and then it's just going to add the ID. So if this is the 13th message, it'll be message_13 will be the div's ID for this thing. So it's kind of weird, but it's also kind of nice. It's just a couple helper methods. You could, in theory, just completely like write this out as like a div with an ID equal to message underscore, and then you could do your Ruby code where you grab the message.id, and it's going to look something like this is what this is going to spit out. And then, of course, we're wrapping everything in here inside of this tag. Once we have that, we can then go ahead and add the last bit, which I guess I'll walk you through. It's just going to be a p tag with a bit of Ruby code, and we'll close the p tag. We'll come over here, and inside of quotation marks, we will say this is the message.user.email, and then we'll capitalize the email. We can then close this. We'll add in a colon. So you can see here, we're just putting the person's email at the start of the message with a colon, and then we just do the message.body. We can go ahead and save that, come over here and refresh, and there you can see my message from earlier is right there. I'll hit 1, 2, 3, hit create, hit refresh, and now you can see 1, 2, 3 appearing right there. Okay, so that's pretty neat. Maybe what we would want to do instead of iterating through all of the message in this order is we could do room.messages.reverse each. And now it'll be the newest message first. We hit create, and now 333 is at the top. Cool. So this is sort of how it'll work. We just now need to broadcast these messages. We'll broadcast them first, then we'll add in the admin functionality. And I promise I am trying to go as fast as I humanly can. So hopefully this doesn't take too much longer. Let's come into our message model. Inside of our message model, we just need to broadcast the after create commit, broadcast to room. We don't have a broadcast to room method yet. So let's create a private area down here, do a def for the broadcast to room. And inside of this, we're going to broadcast to the specific room name. We're going to create a variable, call it room name, and then it'll be the room_room.id. So this is similar to the DOM ID for the room. Now I don't remember if we actually created this. So let's come into our _room.html.erb, and it doesn't look like we did. Actually, it might not even be in here. It might be in the show page for the room. So let's come into the show page for the rooms right here. Beautiful. What we want to do is we want to turbo stream from the DOM ID for the @room. And then inside of our message, we do a broadcast to the room_room.id, which is the same thing as that turbo stream from we just did. Now that we have that, I can find my notes again, and we can say we want to broadcast prepend. This is a prepend because we want it to be at the start of this list, not at the end, so that it matches this because we want the newest message to be at the top. We want to broadcast prepend to the room name. We then want to have a target. The target for this will be just the word messages. That's why we made that div have the ID of messages. This is the ID of the div. We then come down here and we give this a partial. This is the partial we're going to be adding here. It's going to be the message partial. So we're going to say partial messages/message. We then have to give it a locals, which is going to be the message.self. I'll now hit Control S to save this, Control R to refresh, type, I don't know, JK, click create message, and it looks like that didn't actually broadcast to the appropriate area. All right, so I figured out what the problem is. I'm looking at the home page here. I'm not looking at the actual room. So now I'm in /room/1. And now if we type test in here, this should, there we go, work without refreshing. Okay, cool. So now that we've dealt with a very silly mistake, we probably should, at this home page here in the show page, we should probably be careful how we're doing this so that we're not rendering all of these messages. So maybe in this show page, instead of rendering the at room, all we want to do is render a link to this room. So, or in the index page, we want to not render the room. We want to just render a link to the room. So let's do a, I don't know, a room.name here instead on the home page. There we go, example, and then we can click show this room. So now in here, we can say hello, and that'll get added to the chat box thing. Next, let's add in the admin functionality. So for this, we're going to need this second window here. So I'm going to move the main window off to the side. This will be our first piece of custom functionality. So the way this works, we can close the index here. Basically, we have to add a stream to our show. We have to add in some custom logic to our message partial, and then we have to add in something to our message.rb. Inside of our show page, all we really want to do is we just want to check if the current user is an admin. Because we're not inside of a turbo frame here, we can actually access the current user. That means we can come in here and we can say something like this is a turbo stream from. We can then pass in an array, and you can think of this as just telling it that this is the ID with an admin right here for this turbo stream. But we want to be a bit more specific than just doing the room ID that or the DOM ID that we had up here. We can leave the DOM ID as the last bit, as the second argument in this array, or the second element. And the reason why we do that is so that we're not broadcasting this to an admin that's in any chat room. We want to broadcast this to an admin that's specifically in this chat room. There's probably a cleaner way to do this, but what we can do then at the start here is we can just add in an admin tag, and now we just have to turbo stream to admin, then whatever this DOM ID is right here for the at room. So we'll save this. We can then come into our message, and inside of our message, we want to add the actual logic for what the admin will see. So inside of our _message.html.erb file, we need to add a turbo frame tag. We're going to do something similar to what we just did, but this time it's going to be a turbo frame tag that takes in an array where the first argument is a string with controls and then the DOM ID for message. So you can think of this as each of these having a specific message ID for the div, and we're just adding in a div that has controls _message_13, for example. So that will that'll give us this for this turbo frame tag. We don't need to wrap this in anything. This is just a bit of a signifier that each of these messages has one of these. So if we go ahead and we open one of these, I'll click on this top one, for example, and then I expand this a little bit. You'll see that this top one has a message or a turbo frame ID of message_9. If I refresh and grab one of these like this one, you can see this has a turbo frame ID of controls _message_9, but there's nothing in it, and that's totally fine. Now, what do we want to actually put in this turbo frame controls? We want to render some admin controls. So what this will look like is we're just calling render for messages/admin_controls. We then pass in the message, which is just the message, if admin is true. This means we have to pass in this admin variable, and we have to create this admin controls. So how do we pass in the admin variable? That part's actually not too bad. We just come back to our _room.html.erb. After the message, we then pass in admin, and we just pass in current_user.admin ? This is what's loaded when the page is first loaded. So here we're allowed to pass in the current user, totally fine. We can then come over to our message.rb, and in here we can do the secret sauce a bit. So basically what we do is we broadcast append to the admin room. So let me come down here, copy this, come over here. What we do is after we broadcast to the regular users, so that's something that everyone gets, which is the message content, we're then going to specifically broadcast to the admins, because to those admins, we want to specifically only send the ability to delete something, or the delete button, you can think of it. So we give it a target. The target will be controls _message_ID. And remember, if we come back to our message, The controls underscore message underscore ID is this part right here. This is our target. In this target, we then just want to say, hey, in here, I want to pass in a partial. This partial will be let me copy and paste this. It'll be the messages/admin controls partial. And then for the locals that we like to pass in, all we're going to pass in is the message self. So it looks vaguely similar to this top one up here where we did the broadcast to the room name with the message. But here what we're doing instead is we are then grabbing the target for the controls message and the admin controls as the partial instead. So just a slight change. So let's come into our Explorer and let's actually create these admin controls so that this can make a bit more sense. So we'll come into views, messages, right click, new file, underscore admin, underscore controls.html.erb. And this is a super complicated file that you will probably have to study for years on end. We create a button to do the admin delete with a comma. We then go to the room underscore message underscore path. We pass in the message.room and the message. So this will go to room / whatever this ID is / messages / whatever this ID is. We then do a method : delete. And then if you want to add in that extra flair, you can then do something like a are you sure tag. So let me just come over here and clean this up. We have our message path, our method delete, and our data : with some braces, confirm, are you sure? We can go ahead and save that. We can hit F11. We can come over here and refresh. Now you can see when the user first refreshes this page, they see the admin delete. If I come over here with, I guess John needs to be logged in, right? So let me go to local user or localhost /user /sign in, john@doe.com with a password of password. We can click show this room. You can see John doesn't see this admin delete. And that error, of course, is because we're not doing enough checking to make sure that everyone is signed in. That is something you'd also want to do. But in this case, it's fine because we're just assuming the user is going to be signed in. So I'm going to go ahead and delete some of these. We're not going to be broadcasting the deletions right now. So whenever we delete something, we then have to refresh. But this will at least let us clear this up so we have something a bit more readable to look at. So now we have two messages. So, okay, what happens if I come in here and I type 333, create message? We can see undefined local variable or method admin for whatever this is inside of our message controls. So what that means is we then have to come into our message. This is being passed in the admin. So anywhere where this is being passed in, we have to make sure admin is defined. So back in our message.rb, we were trying to pass in the admin for our admin room right here. We need to make sure that we are passing it in for this top bit right here. And because this is a target for the admin controls, we can actually skip the admin flag. Because this is a target for the message partial itself, which has that admin boolean in it, we need to make sure we're passing in admin false right here. So we can go ahead and save that, exit out of here, refresh. We'll do admin only. We can send create message. I have to refresh in the other screen. Okay, so let's try that again, and I'll try to create a message. So now you can see it's appearing in both, but the admin delete's only over here. So now let's make sure the admin delete can actually delete a message, right? And broadcast it over here. So to do this, we come in here. I'll hit Control B. Inside of our model, we just do a after destroy commit. We then call broadcast remove to room. That's going to be a method we define down here. So broadcast remove to room. What does that look like? Well, we have to grab our room name again. That's just the same variable as up here. I'm just doing that so it's a bit more reusable. Of course, you could store it in a better variable instead of redeclaring the variable each time. So that kind of defeats the purpose of the reusability, but whatever. We can then go ahead and grab the broadcast remove to room name with a target of the message underscore ID, which is that same DOM ID helper we had before. We'll come over here, refresh this one, click delete, click delete, click delete, and you can see it deleting on both screens. So that's cool, right? Pretty cool. This is only being shown for one person. Now, what happens if we want John to be able to delete his messages as well? Well, this is a very intricate design that we have here where we only use the best practices. So what we can pretty much do is copy this little admin bit that we have right here, come right here and paste it in. We can then save this so that our formatter can clean up our mess. Now, instead of this saying admin, this is going to be to a different channel entirely. This is going to go to the user and dot to underscore GID underscore param. This is going to convert our user ID to a GID param, which is pretty neat. We can then use this in some other logic. Now for our target, this controls message is fine because we're not showing the admin controls to the user and we're not showing the user controls to the admin because they don't need it because they're an admin, right? So we're going to use the same target for both. We're just going to change which partial we're sending and which channel we're sending it to. So we're only going to send it to the user with a GID that is equal to the creator. And then we're only sending the admin stuff to the admin, of course. Now, the last thing we want to do here, we have the admin controls for the messages. We actually want this to be a partial we call user controls. And then for the locals, we need to pass in a user local. And you'll see what we're using this for in a second. We can just leave it with the user colon and that'll work just fine. Next, let's come over here, scroll down to our messages, right click, new file, underscore user, underscore controls.html.erb. This is going to look very similar to our admin button, except here we're calling it a button to create or delete. Instead, it's still to the same path with the same method and the same data. We're pretty much only changing the text here. So we can go ahead and save that, close this. Next, we can come over to our underscore message. Inside of this partial here, what we want to do is we have the user controls. So we're going to go ahead and render those. And then we want to do a message colon message, but this time we can't check if it's for the user. So instead what we do, or if it's for the admin, instead what we do is we check if the user is defined and we check if the user is equal to the message.user. Now the reason we do it like this is because we're only passing the user in certain circumstances. The main one being when the app first loads, we want to be able to see the delete button for existing users. In that case, we're going to come into our underscore room partial. And inside of our underscore room partial, for our message render right here, we're going to pass in that user. Oops, we're going to pass in that user right here. We'll do a comma, enter. User is going to be the current underscore user. So we're only passing it in here, probably not the best practice. You might want to pass it in other places, but in this case, we're just going to do it like this. What that means is we can then come into our message.rb. We then pass in the user for the specific case, and then we should be good to go. So let me come over here and refresh. Create or delete for John is there, deletes it for both. Let me refresh in both. 1, 2, 3, create the message. And it's not being created here when John creates this message. So why is that? Well, the reason is it's not being broadcasted here. If I refresh, the button appears, right? I can create test here with Dean, and Dean has access to both, but that create or delete's not being broadcasted. Well, if we come into our rooms and our show page here, you might be able to guess what's wrong. Basically, we have a stream for our regular messages. We have a stream for our user or our admin controls, but we don't have a stream for our user controls. So looking at our message partial right here, can you guess what this needs to look like? It's this line right here where we have the user and to GID param. So we come back to our show page. We do a turbo stream from current user and dot to GID param. The and is just, again, to make sure that if current user is null, this doesn't throw an error. Now, if we come over here and refresh, 1, 2, 3 from John, the creator delete appears, the admin delete appears. John can creator delete that one and creator delete that one, and I can admin or creator delete this one. I can do a test. Sorry, looks like my recording corrupted there a little bit. You can see here I've sent a bunch of messages. John only has the creator deletes. Dean has admin deletes for some of them. Doesn't have creator deletes for the other ones, but only has them for his own messages. You get the idea. This should hopefully cover all of the edge cases. Of course, there's always a chance I might have missed something, but I think this is working. Hopefully this is helpful because this has been an absolute nightmare once again to figure out. And this time it is in a very focused tutorial that covers exactly what it needs to. I will have the source code for this available in the video description if there's anything you want to check out. And chances are at some point something's going to break, so feel free to ask a question down below if something doesn't work. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope I will see you in the next tutorial.